So all of us here, I mean, everyone here today wants to be better designers, right? Like, we wouldn't be here in a dark theater on a Friday afternoon at a conference geeking out over design things if we didn't. That's kind of what we're into. And as it turns out, understanding the best ways to use animation will actually make you a better designer. It's totally true. Taking advantage of animation lets us communicate on a whole other level. And it just gives our projects a kind of life and depth that other design tools just really can't. I mean, things like typing, color, and hierarchy are super awesome, and I love them, but they just don't have the same capacity to communicate as animation. They don't have that same, essentially that whole other dimension of time. I actually think that we should use more animation in our design work. And some people think that's a really terrible idea. Some of you might think it's a really terrible idea, but then why would you be here if you did? But whatever. Could happen, I don't know. And I totally understand that standpoint, because it's like, due to things like, I don't know, banner ads, skip intro, and other terrible crimes against humanity, animation on the web has a really bad reputation. Like, it doesn't get enough credit, I kind of feel bad for it. You're like, you're not all bad, you can do good things. I know you can. So a lot of times when I talk about the idea of using more animation in our design work and more animation on the web, people assume that we're going to end up with a whole internet that looks like this. And for anyone who's wondering what's happening, which is probably every single one of you, I'm scrolling down the page, and everything's just flying in from God knows where for who knows why. And then when I get to the bottom, I can scroll back up and do it all again. Yay? It's like, hopefully no one just lost their lunch over that. But more animation in our design work on the web can also mean things like this. And this is Stripe Checkout. If you've ever re-upped your Dribble Pro subscription or something, you've used it, and for many other things as well. And when they designed this whole experience, this whole process of checking out with Stripe, they wanted it to feel sophisticated, modern, and trustworthy. And one of the main things they used to do that was animation. And if you compared the total number of animations in that GoChat thing to all the animations you'd see going through the whole process of Stripe checkout, you might end up at a really similar number. Because the difference between these two kinds of animation isn't the number of animations, it's not the amount of animations, it's the design behind them, the idea that the ones in Stripe have purpose and style. Someone has actually thought about the design of those. The ones in the GoChat thing, I honestly have no idea. But the kind of animation that we want to use is the kind that Stripe has. That's the kind we want to have in our own work. And really great UI animation has both purpose and style. It's like both things have to be there. You could have a really beautiful animation, but if it's there for no reason, sorry, it's not a great UI animation. And if you have a really useful animation, but it's the ugliest thing I've ever seen, it's not really going to work either. So today we're going to be talking about crafting the style and the look of these animations, of getting those design decisions behind how to have style. We won't be talking about useful places for animation, because that's a whole other talk. But we'll be talking about how it looks and getting that style. So when it comes to designing the way animations look, if we're web design people, if you're a web design person like me, we don't really have much background in motion design. Generally, that doesn't get taught in web design school, doesn't get taught in design school, and maybe even if you do, you probably haven't had to use it in like a million years, because we couldn't really do this stuff very well until recently. So it's not something we're super familiar with in like a book smart kind of way. But don't worry, this isn't going to be one of those talks where I'm like, designers should code and project manage and run everything, and like designers should do all the things. And you're like, When it comes to this animation stuff, it's a lot of things that we've seen a lot in things we've watched, like cartoons and films. We just don't have names for it. But once we get the labels and we start recognizing it, and it's really not that big of a stretch. It's not that much of a stretch from design. And the place we get these design decisions, or how we make the design decisions behind this motion, generally relies on the classic principles of animation. You've probably heard of the 12 principles of animation. And if you haven't, you might have heard of a company called Disney, who effectively wrote the book on that, which is this book, The Illusions of Life. Written in the 30s, it's about like this thick. It's pretty heavy. It's awesome. Smells like old library. And this is where the 12 principles of animation came from. Though interestingly enough, the book is like this thick, and the 12 principles of animation is like 20 pages. So there's even more to it. It's crazy. If you don't like books, there's also like a Tumblr version. Actually, it's a really good summary of the 12 principles of animation and what they mean, and really good examples of them. So these are the sort of things we rely on to make these design decisions and apply them to the things that we're actually making. And the reason, or what Disney's animators were writing about in The Illusions of Life, was effectively trying to kind of encapsulate all the techniques and things they use to, make it appear like these 2D hand-drawn things were happening in real life, how they effectively created life on something that had none of it. For us, our goals are a little different, because I assume no one is actually hand-drawing cell-by-cell any of their web UI stuff. If you are, I'd love to know how that works out for you. So we're dealing with computers and things on screen. So our approach is different, our tools are different. So not all 12 of these principles really apply to us, and our goals aren't exactly the same. Our goal is really to have relatable motion. We want to create motion that people see and that makes it feel like this stuff that we've built has some life to it. Obviously, it's not really alive. It's not real stuff, and we're not trying to make it look like real stuff. We're just trying to make something relatable. Something as humans who see things in the real world might be like, oh yeah, I kind of feel like I know what that's all about. So I put together a little example for us to apply this design thinking to. Don't worry, it has cats. I know that you're not allowed to demo anything to do with the web without cats. So if there's any internet police out here, I got cats. I don't need to be, no fines or anything. And it's also the one that I did for the NetMag cover story. So I've created a confirmation page of, confirming our reservation at a cat cafe, which I don't know if you've never heard of those. It's a place you can go, and you can drink tea and hang out with 1 million cats. It's pretty awesome. They have one here, not here, but in New York. So I'm pretty excited about that. And this is our little confirmation page that I made. I mean, it's okay, it moves, but my problem with it is that it doesn't really, there's no excitement there, right? If we were to act out the motion, which I totally recommend you do, especially at important meetings, he's effectively being like, your reservation's confirmed. And that's kind of it. And it should be more like, your reservation's confirmed, yes! I'm excited to go to the cat cafe, this is not exciting. We need to fix that. So let's take a look at some ways that we can fix it. First, what's going on behind the scenes? There's a couple animations happening, like this one. I guess we're a tiny bit cut off, but that's cool, whatever. There's 2 animations happening. There's a slide in and there's a fade up. They happen at slightly different times, and they both just kind of ease out, nothing fancy. The 2 set of keyframes behind those, or what's running them, is our slide in and our fade in. They're super simple sets of keyframes, which is how I like to keep my keyframes. The simpler, the better. So let's start taking a look at some of these, animation principles, essentially. How can we improve this? How can we get that energy in there and make this reflect the idea of I am totally psyched to go to the cat cafe and hang out with 100 cats and drink fancy tea. That's totally what I want to do. Timing really is everything. Completely seriously everything. You may have heard that timing is the key to comedy, right? It's also the key to animation. So if we follow the logic, if we can master timing, we can be experts at both comedy and animation. That's kind of awesome. Oh, okay, never mind. I think it's awesome. You guys apparently have already mastered comedy, so we'll just talk about the animation part. Timing, when it comes to animation, essentially is a thing that makes objects appear to obey the law of physics. That comes directly from the Illusions of Life book, right? They're trying to create animation that alludes to life, and things like physics and gravity exist in real life, so you want to have those in timing in your animation as well. And for us, timing has kind of 2 parts to it. The main part is the duration of our animations, and if you think about things like how fast something moves, suggests how heavy it might be. That's kind of directly how you get some physics out of it. In a more subtle way, timing is also responsible for establishing kind of the personality and mood of the way something is moving. When we look at things that are moving and we see things that are animated, and we have our kind of normal human approach and normal human brains, we try to make sense of the animation that we're seeing. We're like, why is it moving fast? Did something push it? Is it heavy? Why is it so bouncy? What's going on? We kind of, maybe not actually word for word like that in your head. That might not be your internal dialogue. It's generally mine, but whatever. We want to kind of create this story and reason behind why something is moving the way it is. Sometimes it's not really there, but we make it up. And that's where we get this sort of mood, emotion, and reaction to it. based on how something moves, and in this case, this is mostly controlled by our timing function, especially in CSS, is the easing we choose can really affect this part of timing. Some people call this aspect of timing spacing. I don't really care what you call it as long as you think about it. You can call it Bob. We can start a new trend. Anyways, so timing is super, super important, and timing is essentially things like our timing function in CSS. So you look at the CSS keywords for timing functions, and there are 5. 5 things to communicate all this important stuff. We have to communicate both the key to comedy and the key to animation in 5 things? This is a load of crap. Like, it's not possible. And then when you think about it more, especially when you put on like your super skeptical, sarcastic brain or voice, you're like, well, linear is like completely mechanical motion that has the exact same speed all the way through, and nothing in real life moves like that. So if our goal is relatable motion, that's out. 4. And then ease is just really a kind of crappy version of ease in out, so you probably shouldn't use that anyway. So now we're down to 3. And even if you don't think it's crappy, it's basically the same as ease in out. So we have 3 of them, and you're just like, this is never going to work. But that is why we have things like the cubic Bezier function, or as I like to call it, number barf. Yep. And a lot of times we don't use these so much because we're just like, what? Seriously, what? Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. Like, nobody talks about motion in this sense. Even your most hovering art director is not going to be like, you know what this needs? It needs more of an 0.046, 0.9056, 1.2. Yeah. Like, nobody does that. That's not how we think at all. So the way we tend to actually, or thankfully, we can actually read these in a much easier way, and that is with motion graphs. And this is effectively the same thing we looked at with a number barf. This is just lines we can read. We plot the progression of the animation against time, and the start and finish are fixed because it has to start at the beginning and has to end at the end. That's kind of how this works. And if you're wondering, if you're super mathy, those 4 numbers in the cubic Bezier function are the x and y coordinates of those 2 black dots. So it's sort of like you have a very simple version of Illustrator going on here. You can pull those control handles and change the curve, and anywhere that the curve is very steep, it's moving faster, and where it's flatter, it's moving slow. So this here kind of starts slow, goes super fast in the middle, and ends off slow, so you've got some sort of ease in out. And this lets us create basically any sort of easing we could possibly ever imagine. But if we'd rather just have someone make it up for us, there are things like easing.net, which is a pretty awesome site and has the CSS cubic Bezier equivalents to all of the Penner easing equations. So if you've used those before, they're all here. If you've never heard of them, there's this guy, Robert Penner, who has apparently divined all these easing equations, and we use them for everything. I kind of wish I was Robert Penner. Anyways, that didn't make any sense. But the interesting thing about these, or I guess the most notable thing about these, if you look down each of these columns, like all of those ones that start with ease in, whether it's ease in cubic, quinter, or whatever else, they have a really similar shape to the curve, right? It starts off slow, ends up fast. But there are so many variations. Like even here, there's a bunch of variations. And then if we want to get really crazy, we can go to places like cubicbezier.com and make our own, drag the handles, do whatever you want. And then when you're done with it, you can race it against other timing functions. Yeah, pretty cool. Great office game for you all on Monday. Go to cubicbezier.com, bet one of your coworkers which one's going to win. Spoiler alert, always a tie. But they don't know that, so you can probably at least get like 1 free coffee or lunch out of that. Try it, let me know if it works. So there's a lot of handy tools for creating these, and we kind of, you could say we have almost no reason to use the basic keywords in CSS. We should get a little fancier and do stuff like this to be more expressive with the easing we pick, and to actually pick the easing we pick, instead of just being like, ease out, like think about what you want. So everything is better with cubic Beziers, in case you didn't know that was the point. The point is that everything is better with cubic Beziers. It's really great on like pizza, things like that. Awesome, everything is better. And normally the way we go and pick the cubic Beziers we want for our cat conformation or any project, we pick it the same way we pick type, really, right? We might do something like, there we go. I was like, why is that slide blank? We might do something when we're picking type, like think about what we want to express or what we want it to say, and then we pick a typeface that matches that. Or, we might go to Photoshop and just like pick everything on our list. You can go either way with that when it comes to picking easing. For this one, I'm like, okay, my biggest problem with my confirmation box is like the energy is just not there. He's all like, confirms, and I want them to be like, confirmed. So to do that, I probably want an easing curve that kind of shoots and overshoots its destination, kind of sticks out of the top, and does something a little bit more fun. So I went to cubicbezier.com and found this. Probably messed around a little bit more with different ones, but this is the one I ended up on. And then I went and put it in my CSS code. So instead of that little ease out, I was like, cubic Bezier. I added some number barf. Yay. Awesome. And now our cat confirmation box looks a little bit more like this. And he's like, hey, so just changing the easing, like we're getting a bit more energy, right? This is feeling more like my excitement of going to hang out with a bunch of cats and drinking tea. I can tell there's like 5 of you who are also excited by this. The rest of you, like seriously, you just got to get on board. Cats and tea, come on. You could have coffee. I'm sure they serve coffee. So we're one small step closer to making this a little bit better and giving it more energy. Just that kind of like overshooting and settling back in just feels like it has so much energy. So much energy, it can't stop. And that also conveniently kind of fits in with a second animation principle of follow through. Technically, follow through means that not everything stops at the same time. I think it's a good story. I'm not sure if it's a good story. But the way they explain this particular one is they were like, I mean, the Disney animator guys, because they were all guys, Disney didn't hire women. There's a whole thing about that. But they were like, showed some of their, I guess, like dailies to Walt Disney and were like, hey, Walt, we made this thing. And apparently, he went all like hovering art director on them and was like, you guys know that not everything stops at the same time, right? And then they were like, oh, he's right. And that's how follow-through came about. I have no idea if that's true, but I like the story. But it also makes Walt Disney seem like kind of a jerk. So maybe I don't like the story. I don't know. We'll decide later. But that's essentially what it means. For us, since we're dealing with things that are generally square boxes that don't really have parts, we kind of interpret follow-through as being anything that maybe like overshoots where it's going and has a little bit like, woo, oh yeah, here I am, that kind of thing. So it's a loose interpretation of follow-through, but we're going to do a little bit more of that as well. So that's 2 principles we've taken care of there. And don't worry, we're not going to go through all 12, because we don't have all day. And for some reason, I decided to show it to you again, in case you forgot it. It's actually my cat, by the way, if you want to hang out with him. So random aside time. Oh, wow, it's random aside time already. Half this talk is a random aside. Anyways, variables are awesome for keeping your cubic Bezier sane. If you share the opinion of number barf, like I do, and I've never said number barf as many times as I have so far today. Anyways, if they're hard to read and they don't make a lot of sense. So instead of having something like this, or instead of having those all over your code, using variables, like Sass variables or whatever your pre-thingamabob of choice is, I like Sass, you make some variables, set them to your cubic Bezier functions, give them meaningful names, and then when you go back in your code and you have to like read the stuff you wrote last week, you can see things like this, and you're like, oh, okay. Instead of seeing a list of numbers, I know that's an ease out, and if I'm like super familiar with ease out back, if it's like my most favorite ease out ever, which maybe it is, but I don't think it is, but maybe it is. If it was, I probably know exactly what that looks like. If nothing else, I at least know it's an ease in, and more importantly, if I've used that same ease in like 600 times, like once on line 20 and then once on line 1,000,000, I'll know because it has the same name. I might not recognize the same set of 4 numbers. So that's my super hot Sass tip for cubic Beziers. Back to talking about animation. The third principle I want to apply to our confirmation little window guy is secondary action. And basically that is anything that kind of happens to support the main action. A lot of times, you know, people explain it in cartoonish terms. They're like, oh, it's like a character whistling while he's walking. You know, whistling gives you some idea of the mood and why he's walking the way he is. He probably wouldn't be whistling if he's like going to fire someone or something. So he's probably happy, but it's not required for walking, at least not for most species. I don't know. On the web, we tend to completely ignore this idea that things have parts, and those parts can move differently than the parent. If you think about any, like, you know, feature image slideshows or like carousels you've seen recently, there's probably like an image, and in front of that image there is a box, and in front of that box there's probably text, and maybe there's a button on that box, in that box as well. And the slideshow happens like this. All of those parts slide in, and then they all leave. And then they come back with a different image, different text, and maybe a different button label, and then they leave all together. But like, why? If we're having the same stuff come in and out, like, why can't some of that stay on screen? Why can't some of it move differently than its parent? Why do we act like everything on the web is like etched into a paint of glass? I don't know why. I assume because we're just, I don't know. That just seems to be like what everyone does, and we just keep doing it. But we can break these things up more and actually have them have parts, because websites don't really have like arms and legs and appendages, usually. So to add a little secondary action to our confirmation box, I'm going to have my titles and text move in a slightly different way than the whole like body of the box, because that's the closest thing this box has to arms and legs, titles and paragraphs. I'm not really sure what that metaphor adds up to, but whatever. So to do that, I'm going to start by creating a second set of keyframes, which is really just a short version of my slide-in keyframes. My slide-in keyframes goes from like 400 pixels to its intrinsic place, and my slide-in short goes from like 80 pixels to its intrinsic place. So it's a shorter movement, same idea though. And we're going to end up applying it, actually, I can show you. We're going to apply it to our H3 and our H2, and also to our paragraph. And we're going to apply them with a little bit of a delay as well. So we're not going to start at exactly the same time as the rest of our stuff. So we'll give it a little bit more of like extra follow through as well as that secondary action going on too. So it's like paragraph, arms, and legs. And when we put that all together, it's like, oh, hey, this is starting to look like it's got a lot more energy to it. He's like, woo, yay. And it's really more like a real person, right? Because like if I was going to be in like this confirmation box, and I was like, hey, reservation confirmed. Like my sweater and stuff moves and stops at a slightly different part than my hands and everything else. So this has kind of become lifelike with these just couple of tiny changes. Like this thing that clearly is not alive or never happens in real life. I mean, I've never seen a box just pop out of the sky or air in front of me. Maybe you have, I haven't. But we've added a lot more to it to make it more relatable and seem like something that could exist in real life. And that's really what we're aiming for, is just getting that energy and mood to it. And suddenly this is something that instead of just being like transition all, we've actually designed it. We're like, this is so much better. But there's always one more thing. There's always, always one more thing. Specifically for this, to speed it up. What I should really say is speed it up. I should probably put like 700 exclamation points there, but it didn't fit on the slide, so I stopped at 2. We have this tendency, like while we're designing things, and it totally makes sense. We're obsessing over all the details, right? Like in the same way you might spend like days picking the perfect typeface for something, you might spend days getting the perfect like motion and just designing stuff and being like, yes, this is the easy I want, this is how I want this all timed out, here's how all the parts work together, and you stare at it for hours and hours and hours, and you just want to see every little detail because you want to see all of your effort there. And the time it takes us to design that and even examine all those little details is a lot longer than it takes anyone to read it. Anyone like reading that motion and looking at what we've done and watching it later, they're going to get that same meaning that we've put all that time into putting together in like a fraction of the time it takes us to look at it. So essentially, anything you've got, take the duration and make it like half of what it was, maybe even smaller again, because if you've been obsessing over it, it is totally too slow. You just don't know it. It's true. Mostly I tell you this to save you guys super embarrassing stuff. Because the very first like heavily animated or like major UI animation project I ever had was a kiosk for a hotel. I was working at an agency, and we did this kiosk stuff for this hotel chain. I was super excited. It was like my first lead design job. I'm like, yes, I'm in charge. Everything will be beautiful. And we got to the point where the CEO people from the hotel were coming into the agencies to see what the creatives had made for them. And the big deal was like the CEO guy was going to get to use this kiosk for the first time. And I'm like, this is going to be great. He's going to love it, and I'm going to like be the best person in the whole agency ever, and like everyone will buy me beers or something. It'll be great. But then he's sitting there, crazy, super serious suit guy, sitting there using this kiosk, and like every time he like touches stuff and goes to like next screen, he's just getting like more and more annoyed at like how slow my animations were. And it suddenly went from this thing I was like, yes! I was like more and more embarrassed and just like, oh God, oh no, he's not done yet, it's still going. So I want to save you guys ever living through that, whether it's for a hotel CEO or not. So just make everything faster before you show it to anyone else. And you won't have to go through that, because kind of sucked. Anyways, learn my lesson. Yeah, so make everything faster. And this is kind of our version that's a little bit faster. And it can maybe even be faster still, but Keynote and screen recordings have trouble, so that's that's what we got. And that's where we ended up with. We have something much more lively, much more fun, and I've probably convinced like maybe 5 more of you to be more excited to go to the Cat Cafe. Probably got like at least a crew of 10 now. Yeah, definitely. So one other part to the style of these animations is not just how they look, but also how it behaves. And I kind of took the easy route, and our example didn't really have anything we interacted with. But a lot of the animation we're actually going to be building is stuff people interact with. And that kind of changes the way we have to look at our timing. The speeding up thing is really important for that, of course. If you are clicking on buttons and they seem to like take forever to respond to you, that sucks and no one likes it. Things like that are pretty obvious. But there's also some finer points, so just some things to keep in mind for that part of how to make sure the behavior of what you're creating is something that feels like it's nice to use. So some helpful tips for that. Ease outs tend to feel more responsive. And that's kind of anything that starts out fast and goes slower. And if you think about it, it's because like ease ins are sort of like, hey, oh, what? Did you want something? And ease ins or ease outs, that was ease in. And ease outs are more like, hey, what's up? I'll show you what I mean. More specifically with buttons, because I don't know, does everyone else act out this stuff in meetings? I do all the time, and like, sometimes people don't ever ask me back to meetings. Either that or they're like, get her to do it. Anyways, the one on the left is an ease out, and the one on the right is an ease in. It's not as obvious when you're watching it as when you're using it. This guy on the left, he's our ease out, and the right is the ease in. And you get this tiny little bit of a hesitation on the ease in button where he's like, whoa, what? And on one single button, doesn't make much of a difference. It's a fraction of a second, right? But across your entire site or your entire app or your entire whatever else you're making, this adds up and can start making things feel a bit slow. There's a great tweet, which I did not bother to put in a slide, but I will tell you about it anyways. It's by Kenneth Bowles, and he talks about when they redesigned TweetDeck. He was saying that like the one thing he changed in this one update was he basically just shaved like, I think, 0.25 seconds or like basically milliseconds off every transition in all of TweetDeck. That's all he changed, only design thing he changed. And all these people were like, wow, TweetDeck is so much faster, it's amazing, you did a good job. He's like, all I did was change the transitions. But because it was every single transition over the entire application, you get that like perceived performance like Laura was talking about this morning of like, it just seems faster. So that's important. And then maybe you can do things like that where you're like, all I did was change the transitions, and be like, yes, praise me for my work. Because that's how offices work. Anyways, at the same time, or I guess, yeah, at the same time, more complex easing needs a little more time to be readable. You might have noticed this if you were watching like super, super closely. When we changed the easing from like a straight up ease out to the thing, or to the easing that actually overshot its destination and went back, I didn't change the duration, but it kind of felt like it was happening faster, because there was more to read in the same amount of time. I have a really awesome purple box that will also demonstrate this. We're like, OK, cool, whatever. It's getting wider on ease out. Pretty exciting. I'm so impressed. Then we can go in and change just one thing about this, and that would be the easing, and just change it from an ease out to a fancy cubic bezier that actually is the equivalent of a bounce transition. And then once we finish saving that and looking at it again, it seems to happen a lot faster, but we didn't change the duration at all. There's just more of that little bounce thing to read. And if we kept speeding this up a lot, we'd kind of lose that bounce bit, and it would just look broken. So there's a balance between the easing you choose and duration you choose. Changing one kind of affects the other. And this is one of the reasons why timing is an art, not like you can't just pick one number and be like, always, always, always make your duration 0.15 or whatever, because there's going to be cases where that's not always true. And we need to be like actual designers about it and think about it and kind of look at the overall picture as opposed to just looking at the numbers. Shorter way of saying that is prototype the crap out of everything you make. The easiest way to tell if an animation you're creating is useful or if it feels right to use is to use it. And that makes it especially awesome that we have tools like CodePen or whatever, and we can just like hop into code, make like a crazy big box version of what we want to make and be like, does this feel like something I want to use? Does this feel like it's responding to me? Does it look like it has the energy and message that I want it to have? Is it excited enough for a cat cafe? That kind of thing. Important questions to ask yourselves. I hope you all work for cat cafes. It's, yeah, cats, they're awesome. One other thing that has changed recently that makes this all so much easier for us is we have gotten so much better tools to do this with web animation in the last few months. Like literally in the last 6 months, maybe not even that long, our entire worlds have changed. In March, I was working on this project, and it was a super After Effects-y project, which means I was working in After Effects, because After Effects-y is not a word, but I just made it one. And I was working with a visual timeline and the graph editor. I could move little handles around visually to change the easing, and it was beautiful and amazing. And I was super excited and happy. And then I was also really angry because we don't get to have that on the web. And why can't we have that on the web? Why doesn't CSS get that? This might be another reason why I work by myself. Anyways, so it's why don't we have these tools? And I was like, wait, self, because I talk to myself when I work by myself in my office. We do have these tools. We are totally getting these same kind of tools. In Chrome proper even, not Chrome Canary, actual proper Chrome, we can pause, play, and slow down all of our CSS and Web API animations. This is seriously awesome. This one little line, this one little draggy thing in the play pause is I probably shouldn't admit how many hours of my life I want back because of it. It saves me so much time. When we're doing things testing out whether all of the motion we want is there, and if our animations are all timed correctly, instead of going in and changing every single duration, we can just slow it down here. Hours saved. Perfect. And this works on anything that is a CSS animation or Web API animation. It does not work on JavaScript animation, but you've got the console, so deal with it. You get error messages. Firefox has a really similar thing, in case you thought I didn't like Firefox or you hate Chrome. They kind of split things out. You get to play and pause for each individual animation. It's pretty awesome. You can do the same thing, pause them, play them, and scrub them. Super, super, super helpful. You can do more than just flip the Firefox logo, but I sort of like this video. I'm like, oh, look at it flip around. He's so cute. One better than that is in Chrome Canary. If you hover over any of your easing functions, whether that's a keyword like ease out or some cubic Bezier number barf you've made up yourself, you get this nice little modal thing that shows you the easing curve you've used and an onion skin version of kind of frame by frame of what happened. And you can edit it, or you can just pick some other ones. They're hey, maybe you want to try this curve. What would that look like? So you can actually test out your different easing and see, if you're getting the energy you want, or if different energy or different feel to it, right in DevTools. Just click on a bunch of different ones, and you can even just sort of page through them, pick one you like, copy, paste, done. Hours of your life just saved there too. And if you're wondering where this is all going, why are they putting this in browsers? What do they care? Basically, where they're going with this is the animation timeline. And Firefox is working on something similar, but I couldn't find a video of that, where this basically is giving us in layers all the animations happening on a page, and little curves to show us the easing they're using, plus little lines to show us the duration. It's pretty amazing. It's we finally have this visual control, this visual indication of this stuff we sort of had no idea of before. This one is kind of pre-Chrome Canary. They're showing it off a whole bunch, but it hasn't quite shown up yet, so we can't really use it yet unless you're super sneaky about it. But it's this is so amazing. This is where it's going. And these tools are so much better than what we've had before. Because up until this sort of point, if we're working with CSS animation and we make an animation that's broken, we make a mistake, we would never get error messages. That's silly. Browser sees CSS it doesn't understand, it just ignores it. So if you made a mistake, you would just see nothing. And then you're well, did I make a mistake? Did I animate something off screen? Did I just type something wrong? And you would have no idea unless you just went and spent hours of arbitrarily changing things or built your own debugging tools. Both of those options suck. These are so much better, and I'm super excited to see these happening. Makes our jobs so much easier and makes this much more of an easier thing to use, an easier thing to do. So to kind of continue on from the whole idea of what you guys should do or what you want to do to make better design decisions when it comes to animation, there's more to it than just getting the illusions of life or memorizing all 12 principles on the Tumblr. You can watch the Tumblr a bunch though; it's pretty fun. I like that one. You want to look at other mediums that have been using animation a ton and for ages. There's more than just the Disney folks. They've probably been doing it the longest, but other industries have used it as well. Stuff like Art of the Title is a whole site dedicated to title animation, and it's one of my favorite sites on the entire internet. Interestingly enough, if you read some of the stories behind these title animations, the designers behind them start saying things like, we picked the typeface first and went from there and wanted to have motion that matched the mood of our typeface. And they're talking about dealing with creating, communicating with type and motion, and you're like, I pick typefaces and communicate with type and stuff too. This is awesome. So it's really similar workflow to the way we work on the web, and it's just really, really great stuff. A little bit different than like proper traditional animation, but a really, really interesting read and some really fun things. UI animation has existed in native mobile apps for like forever and ever. I mean, we kind of always have to deal with the web being compared to mobile apps, right? Like, it doesn't do, mobile apps can do stuff that you can't do. Blah. That happens in meetings, right? Just a bunch of blah. Anyways. So, we can actually kind of borrow some things from them. This Captivate.co is one of my favorite gallery sites for looking at native app UI animations, mostly because they kind of group things together. Like, instead of just showing you one screenshot from the Flickr app, they'll show you like 3 or 4. So you can get kind of an idea of the full system of animations and how it fits into the overall design. And take a look at this sort of stuff and think about it as of like, what is this trying to say? What is it trying to help with? Is this something I would want in my product or my app or my site? And those judgments are really the more important part. It's not just like, imitate this stuff we can do on, in mobile apps. It's like, why? Do I really want that? Can I make it better? Sometimes I think we can make the web better. And go back and watch lots of cartoons. Seriously? Gem is on Netflix, if you're wondering. Sheer is not yet. Anyways, go back and watch these things with, once you've read through the 12 principles of animation, whatever else, once you've started paying more attention to these, kind of go back and watch these cartoons that you watched as a kid, and you can see how some of this stuff worked. And I mean, some of it's terrible, low-budget animation, but you can get the idea of just like what they were trying to do and how they were doing it. It's kind of an interesting way to go back and relive your childhood, I think, anyways. But most of all, remember that we are at the very beginning of the web animation, I guess like era? I don't know, it needs a fancy name. But things like CSS animation and like proper web animation that wasn't done with Flash and that isn't done with a plugin, it's only been around for a few years, really. And it's getting better and better. We're getting better tools, like I was showing you. We're getting better support. We can do more and more. And there's kind of like this whole open space of like all this stuff we can design and make with this. I'm excited to see what happens, and I hope you guys are too, because I think there's some really, really interesting times ahead on the web because of all of this stuff. So in case you want to learn more about it, I've made a little page for you guys at valhead.com/generate2015. Hopefully it'll be easy to remember, because that's where we are. And I've listed off some other resources you might want to look into, some places to learn more about web animation, to learn more about traditional animation, some books and some sites and some articles that are super helpful for learning all of this stuff. Because I don't know, I love reading about it endlessly, and hopefully you will too. So thanks a lot, guys.